You haven't been employed since you stopped being a barman in 1969.
No, that's right.
How have you made your living since then?
Well, I haven't made my living. I like many Republicans, live on a sort of the charity of people. It's very, very simple. I don't live at home. I live wherever I happen to be.
Do you change house every night?
Well, I change house as security demands. And there are many people in the same situation. We live a lifestyle which is fairly abnormal, but which doesn't cost an awful lot. I mean, all we want is 2 square meals a day in Sinead.
Do you not get paid a salary full-time by Sinn Féin as a Vice President?
No.
I thought, if not you, others full-time workers are paid by Sinn Féin.
Well, I'm not paid. I mean, anybody that's working full-time obviously has to have petrol money. Obviously, if you want to smoke, you get money for a smoke. But we don't draw a salary.
You just live from...
Just live from day to day. I mean, I have no great material needs.
In what capacity did you attend the negotiations with Mr. Whitelaw in 1972?
Well, I was interned in 1972, in March of 1972. I was released in June or July, I'm not sure just exactly when. That was my first indication that anything was happening. Myself and Daithí O'Connell went along to negotiate.
But they didn't have you there as a political organiser, did they?
Oh, of course they had me there as a negotiator.
Right, but
right.
In what capacity were you there?
I was there as part of a negotiating team.
Of the IRA?
Oh, of the Republican movement.
Was that what it was called?
Well, that's what it's always been called.
It was called then a group of IRA negotiators trying to negotiate a truce with the British government.
Presumably then Mr. Whitelaw broke the law.
He is allowed to deal with whoever he wants as a minister, is he not?
Oh, I don't know, that's his problem.
I mean, he certainly met with people who had been sentenced as members of the IRA as well. I'm just asking you, if you say I'm not, but in what capacity were you there?
Well, I was there as part of a negotiating team. I went and negotiated a truce. The truce terms were acceptable to both the British government and the IRA. Part of those truce terms were military arrangements. Part of them were a meeting between a Republican delegation, which put the Republican demands to Whitelaw in London.
You have written in a pamphlet about, in response to the peace movement about conscience. And you said that Republicans must ensure that our cause and our methods remain within the bounds of our consciences, and we must ensure that our consciences are dictated to by our concern for the welfare of our people. Now, do you have it on your conscience, some of the things that have happened? The innocent victims of the IRA, the Le Mans bombing, which killed a lot of innocent people.
Well, I regret, as anyone regrets anyone being killed. I even regret, as it may surprise you, British soldiers being killed. But I mean, it isn't on my conscience that these things happen. Each one of us, and we could maybe take 15 or 20 minutes to answer that question in full, right? But each one of us knows that for which they are responsible, right? And each one of us at some period in time is going to meet God. Right? Now, I am happy enough, right, that my contribution that I have tried to live by my standards. Right? That isn't to say that I'm a perfect person, I am not.
And it's not on your conscience that the sort of things you've advocated have helped?
Well, what have I advocated?
Well, in advocating the support of the armed struggle, you have helped fill the prisons with young men, you have helped fill the cemeteries with young men.
I mean, the situation very, very simple.
Young Catholic men.
The situation very, very simply that there have been hundreds of thousands of young men and young women have gone through prisons, right? And the responsibility for that, I mean, before my time, lay with the British government, and the responsibility for that during my time. I haven't anyone in prison. The British government has people in prison. I didn't bring British troops into this country. The British government brought British troops into this country. I didn't destabilise the whole living standards of ordinary people by imposing a gerrymandered situation. The British government did that.
But you don't have it on your conscience then?
No, of course not.
Any of this?
No,
any of the innocent victims, or any of the young men, the young Catholic men who have followed you into prison?
No, none at all. The situation very, very simply is this, and I've said it categorically. The responsibility for the problems in Ireland is a British responsibility. Those people who resist that have my support. I will defend their right to resist it. I'll defend it with anyone, I'll debate it with anyone. They have the right, just as much as an English person would have the right, to rise up and resist foreign oppression in England.
It sounds as if you're prepared to use any means, however violent, however barbaric in the end, to achieve your end.
Well, that's a ridiculous question.
No, is it true?
Well, of course it isn't true. I mean, the situation is, can I appeal on this television programme for the British government to please leave our country? And will they leave? will they leave? Now, the British government doesn't give anyone a choice.
Is your own persistent denial of being a member of the IRA, is that a matter to do with the law because it's an illegal organisation and therefore you can't admit it? Or have you made a conscious decision to be separate from it?
Well, I mean, the situation of my membership of the IRA is just that I'm not a member of the IRA, and that's a de facto situation. The persistence, I don't go around persisting. You know, I don't go around saying, I'm not in the IRA, I'm not in the IRA. Well, every so often somebody says I am and I deny it.
You were charged with it, and you denied it persistently.
Yes, that's right, right. And the charge didn't stand up in court. I wasn't discharged on the basis of my denial.
Is it not true, though, that you have a decisive voice in the activities of the IRA?
No. I mean, the IRA knows its own business best. The IRA conducts its own business as it sees best. Even physically, I don't even know why this is a pertinent question, but even physically it would be impossible for me to be tied up with what I'm tied up politically and be able to have time to devote to many other activities. And that's been further exacerbated by the fact that I'm involved in constituency matters. So it just isn't. There just aren't enough of me to go around. When I was in prison, how did the IRA go on? You know, I mean, the whole question's all full of irrelevancies.
At what point does what you call the armed struggle, this campaign essentially of murder, at what point does that cease?
Sinn Féin doesn't advocate a campaign of murder. Sinn Féin supports politically and defends the right of people as legitimate action to resist British rule.
But it also has a resolution which you read out at your party conference only last month, that all its candidates must be unambivalent in support of the armed struggle. Right. Now that is a campaign of murder.
Well, sure. Let me just...
And it was passed, wasn't it, without anybody objecting?
Passed, and that's always been the Sinn Féin position, and it's been nothing new. Now, the British government are unambivalent in their support of what happens in this country. There's no one goes along and awards IRA men medals when they kill civilians. Yet the British government, when British troops wantonly and deliberately and consciously opened fire and killed civilians in Gerry, the British government awarded the person in charge medals.
Brings them to trial.
Let me finish. No, it didn't bring the people in bloody Sunday to trial. Right, the British government doesn't bring the people. It's okay for the British government to go and murder people in the Argentine and to be applauded for their actions.
Well, that is another argument.
It isn't another argument. I mean, if it's legitimate for the British government, right, to resist what they see as oppression by the Argentines, it's certainly, very, very certainly legitimate for Irish people in their own country. Remove the British prop, and Protestant people and Catholic people who are not divided on theological arguments, but who are only divided because one section was given a marginal privilege over the other. Remove the prop which creates that, and we can get down as a free people to deciding and planning our own destinies.
If they chose, on your system of values now, if they chose to feel oppressed by you, would they not have the right that you claim to fight against you and throw you out of their part of Ireland?
As they say it, they may, right? But there's no...
Well, what's the difference?
Well, the difference is very, very simply that there is no way that a minority, a political minority, not an ethnic minority, not even a religious minority, that a minority, which is a political minority of, at the moment, loyalism, right, who are prepared...
They're a majority, of course, in Northern Ireland.
But if you carve up a country, anybody can be a majority.
But it's 60 years on, isn't it? And
of course, but whose fault is that?
They're different people.
But, I mean, they're not a different people. How are they a different people?
Well, how are they the same people?
Well, how are they? You said they're different people.
But they're different people. They have different allegiances. They have a different culture. They have, most of them, a different religion. All they happen to do is to share the same island with you.
They haven't got different values, right? They are as oppressed as we are, right? Secondly, they haven't got a different culture. And thirdly, they have not got different allegiances, at least not long-standing allegiances. The allegiance from loyalists, right, to the British Crown, and it says this in many, like the Orange Oath and so on, will give their allegiance to the English Crown for as long as the English Crown protects the Protestant ascendancy. So you have a catch-22 situation.
But now, the bottom line in that still is, if they won't accept it, what will you do?
Well, I mean, that's exactly, that depends on how...
Because they've said they won't accept it.
But that depends on how that non-acceptance manifests itself.
Well, that's why I come to my question. When does the armed struggle end?
Well, the armed struggle, obviously, I mean, as far as I would be concerned, ends when the British government has withdrawn its forces from this country. and when it has dismantled all its colonial institutions in this country. I mean, that's as far as I can say. That's against...
And if the Protestant and Unionist community, call them what you will, or the majority of Northern Ireland refuse to accept what you then offer to them, my question is, what would you do to them?
Well, I mean, that remains... I can't see that, in all honesty, happening. I mean, if we're talking about a situation where a section of the loyalist population raise up in arms, well, obviously the people against whom they raise up have the right to defend themselves. The problem is with the armed militia, is with the UDR and the RUC, who have British guns. And obviously the British are going to go out, they're going to have to disarm their own forces, and the RUC and the UDR are part of their forces.
So we would, to get to your stage of removing the British prop, we would have to deliver to you the Protestant majority in Northern Ireland, defenceless, without British guns, as you say, in the UDR, without guns for the RUC.
Well,
I'm asking you that.
Right. Oh, of course. I mean, you must dismantle. I mean, it's no use to withdrawing some lad who's in the British Army and sending him back home, and leaving another British soldier who just happens to be from the Mavada here, upholding. I mean, the British withdrew from the 26 counties on the basis that they could preserve British interests with an economy of British slaves. Well, the same thing can't happen again. There's no use, I mean, the whole strife continuing and the British leaving a rearguard defence for their interests and domestic forces. If the thing is going to be dealt with honestly, and the British government haven't got either the integrity at this moment in time or the honesty to deal with the situations that deserve to be dealt with.
In the course of our interviews with a number of people who've known you, people who've observed you, many of them have said that you're a man of great ability. But Tim Pat Coogan has also said that you are the movement's shogun, the supremo. Harold McCusker, that your hands are drenched in blood. Ian Paisley, that you're associated with murderers, and the Secretary of State, that you're one of a number of bad men. What do you reply to that?
Well, I mean, I've really nothing to say about it. They see things obviously from their own political position. They can make the statement saying make it entirely up to themselves. All I know, right, I'm not going to defend my position and the answer to sort of scurrilous allegations from, I would respect Tim Pat Coogan to some degree because he's not directly involved, but not from Harold McCusker, not from Ian Paisley, who's an arch-demagogue, and not certainly from James Pryor. I challenged James Pryor last month to stand in West Belfast in the election. Who does he represent here in this country? Doesn't represent anyone. Whatever James Pryor says is meaningless. He's only here, obviously, to do a job, which he's very well paid to do. But I'm not getting well paid to do what I'm doing. No one's forcing me to do what I'm doing. I am only one of a large group of people who believe that the British shouldn't be here, who believe that our people can live in peace and prosperity in the absence of the British government, and who have dedicated a certain amount of their time into trying to achieve that situation. And that's it. It's very, very simple.